Next, we're going to look at measuring hurricanes. So hurricanes are divided into categories. These categories are based solely on the wind speed of the storm. Usually this is based on what we call the 1 minute continuous speed. So they actually clock the winds for 1 minute, and it's the fastest wind that it is sustained for an entire minute. They can also do the 5 minute sustained wind as well. So anything that fits some of those kind of parts of definition of the hurricane with the central low pressure system and tropical and heavy thunderstorms, that's referred to as a tropical depression when it's got really low wind speeds. And as that pressure is really low, it pulls in more air and from around it on the surface of the ocean. And the more it pulls in, the faster it pulls it. So you tend to get higher and higher wind speeds, which means it builds in its categories. So a depression is less than 39 miles an hour, and a tropical storm is between 39 and 73 miles per hour. Now, the tropical storm is when we start naming them, and we're going to talk about the names here in just a second too. But those are going to be a little bit stronger, but they can still pack a wallop if it reaches the shore. You get a lot of damage and flooding, mostly to vegetation, maybe just a little bit to houses, particularly things that aren't secured very well. But once the winds make 74 miles an hour, that's officially a hurricane. Now, if you look on down, you've got a category 2 at 96 miles an hour, a category 3 at 111, category 4 at 131, and a category 5 has winds of 155 miles an hour or higher. There's not much that can withstand 155 mile an hour winds. And I know that kind of the breakdown of these categories probably sounds kind of strange for the miles per hour, but that's because it was initially based on kilometers per hour, and those numbers look a little bit neater. They break off in whole numbers that way. And there's a few ways of looking at the categories too. I like some of these pictures to sort of show you what's happening during these. And when we watch hurricane videos, I like to watch, what's going on in the video, because sometimes you can actually figure out pretty easy what category it is just from what's moving, especially the palm trees. It seems to be always palm trees, but these do happen along the coast. So your category 1 hurricane's going to blow the trees around a little bit, maybe take down some power lines, but that's about it. Your category 2 is going to start just taking off your shingles and taking down the power. And you can see at this point, those palm trees are actually losing some leaves. At category 3 is considered devastating. And you can see here, the palm trees are actually bent over. So that's a nice kind of marker. For category 4, the palm trees have gone away. It's completely blown them away. And of course, everybody's fun. Category 5, actually, no, it's not fun at all. It's horrendous. But at that point, the houses and the buildings are gone too, not just the palm trees. Of course, my favorite categories. I'm actually literally laughing at myself because I love these pictures. I really, really enjoy these categories of hurricanes too, and the poor kitties all caught in the wind, but our little kitties being picked up and flung away on a category 5. They crack me up. Now, these categories really only apply to our northern Atlantic storms and the Northeast Pacific, and those are the ones that tend to affect mostly the coast of Mexico and sometimes the very southwest coast of the United States. And so these are the categories we're used to and the ones I just went through for you. But if you look over at the columns further on the right, you can see the categories for different locations elsewhere in the world, like the Pacific, actually has two different ways of measuring or at least categorizing their storms versus the parts of the Indian Ocean and Australia as well. And we can sort of look at intensity. A lot of times when people talk about hurricane intensity, it's based on the pressure at the time of landfall. And so the pressure is really low. So the lower the pressure, the more intense. I know that's probably backwards of what we usually think about. And so for the United States, at least, the most intense hurricane that had the very lowest pressure at landfall was the Labor Day hurricane in 1935. And we're going to talk about this quite a bit later because it's a pretty notable hurricane and one of very, very few hurricanes to make landfall as a Category 5 storm. Now, of course, one of the things that I've been referring to are names of hurricanes. And I don't know if you've ever really thought about it and why hurricanes are named at all. So these names are based off a preset list, and I've got the list all here for you. There's 6 of them, and they rotate. And so in 2026, we will jump back and go with the names from 2020, unless we have to retire some of those. Based on the damage from Hurricane Laura, there's a chance that that one might be retired. I wouldn't hold my breath, but I think there's a good chance of it. Up until 1979, the list was actually all women's names. Leave it to a bunch of male meteorologists to name devastating storms all after women, right? But in 1979, they decided to be a little bit more fair, and so now the names alternate between more masculine and more feminine names, although I think we're probably getting to the point where it's not just, men and women names at this point. And then they switch. So if you notice, 2020 starts with a more masculine name and 2021 starts with a more feminine name. And they try to make sure and pick names that reflect some of the areas that are affected. And so a lot of times we see very American sort of names. We also see some names that are more Hispanic in origin because of all these Spanish-speaking areas that are also affected by these Atlantic storms as well. Now, why in the world would you name a storm, though, right? Well, what people have historically found out is prior to naming them, they numbered them, and if somebody gets on the TV and is like, oh, storm 1 is coming for us, you better be careful. And you're like, what? It's just, 1, who cares? But, if somebody gets on the TV and they're like, Hurricane Danny is going to make a landfall any moment, you're like, oh no, Danny's kind of scary. Although, I'll be honest, some of the names aren't particularly scary sounding, like Hurricane Richard or Hurricane Mindy. But I always like looking through them because you always know somebody with some of these names, and it's kind of funny. Now you'll notice they're in alphabetical order, although not every letter of the alphabet is here. So there is no U or X, Y, Z. I think those are all the ones that are left off of it. So it gives you sort of a limit to the number of names that you can give storms. So what happens if you run out and there are still more storms? Well, the good news is this has only happened once. That was in the year 2005. One of the reasons why everybody sort of knows this particular one is this is the year that Hurricane Katrina made landfall along the Gulf Coast of the United States. So Hurricane Katrina was only one of the storms. And if you look all the way down, some of these only have numbers here. So the numbers are just ones that only made it to a tropical depression. although it was like, the 10th storm or the 19th storm. They just give those numbers versus using the names. But down there on October 22nd, a tropical storm formed, and they had already used all their names. And so this was dubbed Alpha. So we actually got Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon, and Zeta that year. And those are the Greek alphabet. And so once you run out of the named storms, you just start naming them after the Greek alphabet. The good news is it's only happened once. But unfortunately, it'll probably happen again at some point. Now, a number of these storms ended up being pretty significant. So names you don't see on the list anymore include Dennis, Katrina, Rita, Stan, and Wilma. Those were all pretty devastating storms, so they've retired those. And there's a group that gets to pick the names, and they're also the ones that get to pick who to retire. If you look, there's a few names on the storm on it that have been retired since too, when this has rotated through. So Harvey is off of the list. If you remember, Hurricane Harvey hit the Houston area not too long ago. And also Hurricane Maria. Those are two names that have been taken off since as well. We'll talk about the year of those storms here coming up too.